Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Museum of Science and our special high school event. AI is all around us. We're so happy that you all were able to join us this morning for this event. And we also just wanted to, again, thank everyone for their flexibility and moving our keynote time a little bit around so that we could accommodate and get everybody in here today. Now, I do have a couple of housekeeping things to go over with the group before we actually start the formal portion of our program. First off, my name is Christina. I'm one of the educators here at the Museum of Science. I will be serving as the moderator of this program today, and we will have an opportunity to ask questions throughout the program as well. Now, if for some reason you have to leave the theater at any point during the program, if you have to step out, go to the restroom, anything like that, you are certainly welcome to do so. But we usually ask that you would exit through the back door, all the way in the top, what's my left, your right corner. And we also ask that if there is an emergency, that door is an emergency exit, as well as the one over here to your right, and then the one over here to your left. Now, for our format today, this is a 45-minute panel, so we are going to let our panelists introduce themselves for about 5 minutes, and then we're actually going to open up the program to all of you to ask questions. And if you would like to ask questions today, we are going to have two ways that you can do that. The first way is to use Slido. So if you do happen to have a mobile device with you today, you are able to go ahead, take note of this code or take note of this number, and you will be able to actually submit some questions today. But we will also have another educator with a microphone who will be running around the audience as well. If you would prefer to ask a question live, you'll be able to do that as well. We will be showing this code later as well, so if you haven't had a chance to take note of it right now, don't worry, it will not be your last time to see it. Last but not least, I wanted to introduce our panelists today. So today we have Regina Barzilay, Professor of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science from MIT. We also have Dr. Jonathan DeCastro, Senior Research Scientist from Toyota Research Institute. And we have Sarah Neman, Director of Art and Education at metaLab, which is in Harvard, and also the co-founder of the Data Nutrition Project. So I'm going to actually pass it over to Sarah Neman to get us started, and then we will continue with our program. So let's give them a nice round of applause.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate the enthusiasm, especially this early in the morning. Oh, thank you. So today we're here to talk about AI, and I'm going to, let's see if we can cue up my slides. Oh, my slides. Okay, my slides are queued up. And one of the things I wanted to start with is just the non-traditional paths into AI. So my background is in the humanities, in philosophy and art. And as we're thinking about AI and we're thinking about technical careers, there's a lot of different ways you can get into a technical career, and I think especially with something as broad and all-encompassing as AI, having a background in philosophy has been so beneficial to me, and also if you're interested in the arts or humanities or design, those are all really valuable skills and fields to come from. I bring kind of the spirit of asking questions, my interest in technology, my interest in new technologies as a way to reflect back what it means to be human into my work. And I'm also a working artist. As Christina mentioned, I'm with metaLab at Harvard, and I'm also the co-founder of the Data Nutrition Project. And when I was in high school, when I was sitting in your seats, I did not expect that I would be ever talking about AI, because I didn't identify as a technical person, and I just didn't think I would ever be up in front of an audience, so it's a really pleasure to be here. One of the things I wanted to mention is that AI is a broad, non-specific term. So we're not going to have time in this 5 minutes, but hopefully in the panel to talk about kind of what AI actually is. There's so much hype around AI, and there's so much misinformation. But one of the things I wanted to share is that it's an umbrella term. It's kind of like the term transportation. If you say transportation, you could be talking about a lot of different things. It depends on the context you're in, it depends on the era that you're in, and it depends on who you are and what you're talking about. So a bicycle can be transportation, so can a rocket ship. AI is the same. It doesn't really mean one thing. So it's always good to ask questions, get clarification on what it is you're actually talking about. And AI is already very much around us. Most of today's AI is basically a lot of data that's being processed really quickly that can be used to make predictions. However, as I'll share, if we take data from the past and we use it to predict the future, then if we're not being careful about what we're doing, then we're going to create a supercharged version of the past, which I think most of us would agree we don't want. So the two things that I focus on primarily, which are quite different, that I'm going to talk about, are data and values. So data, as I mentioned, is the data that's used to train large systems. And the quality of this data is really important. One of the things you may have seen in news articles and elsewhere, or read about or heard about, has to do with bias finding its way into various systems, especially when, as I said before, past data are flawed and can be really problematic. So it's really important that we use the right data to train a model that's going to make predictions about the future. Otherwise, we see things like racist algorithms, news feeds that are optimized for certain things that aren't always in somebody's interest. Any kind of machine learning technology that's using basically a problematic or skewed data set will replicate those outcomes unless there's some effort made to mitigate those. So my team at the Data Nutrition Project and I came up with this metaphor of a nutrition label for data sets. Why don't we take something like a food nutrition label and apply it to data sets so we can very quickly interrogate a data set and flag things that might be harmful. So it's not one size fits all. Like something with peanuts might be fine for one person and it really could kill somebody else. Data sets are kind of the same. Like a data set might be really useful for one purpose and really problematic and actually dangerous in another purpose. And so as you see here on the right, our label, which doesn't really look like a nutrition label, but it has the same idea of trying to just call out high-level things around the data set, including what it was meant for, who paid for it, traditional metadata, but also how it should not be used, and what are certain risks of using the data in certain contexts. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is something called value alignment, which has been getting a lot of flack recently. I don't know, has anybody heard of the value alignment problem? Wow, okay, amazing. All right, so I don't have to tell you about the flack then since you haven't heard much about it, but essentially we have to embed, and John might talk about this a little bit more when he's talking about autonomous vehicles. Essentially we have to embed systems with certain values. They have to be told how to act. They don't have common sense, they don't have intuition. And how we program these systems can have really huge implications. So as somebody coming from philosophy, one of the things I like about AI is that it gives old moral problems new significance. This is supposed to be a trolley. The trolley problem, some of you may be familiar with, has to do with whether it's ethical or morally responsible to make a change yourself to basically affect a trolley that has lost its brakes and is going to hit either 5 people or 1 person. Like, what is the ethical thing to do? Do you push the switch or do you let the trolley go where it was going? This comes in with autonomous vehicles and many, many other AI challenges. So essentially, the value alignment problem is the challenge of ensuring that AI systems act in accordance with human values. But whose values? We have different values, all of us. Across cultures, we have different values. Across individuals, we have different values. Even individually, we have conflicting values all the time. I mean, that's what it means to be a human, is to be a morally incoherent agent. So who programs these systems? I think I'll stop. I think I'll end with this one, which is kind of around intentions. So I think a lot of times we think that good intentions can be sufficient for good outcomes, but they're not. As you see here in this cartoon, on the right-hand side, you see a angry child stomping on ants. And on the left-hand side, you see a parent and child walking up a sidewalk enjoying the sunset. And they look like really different scenes. But from the perspective of the ants, the very same thing is happening. The ants are getting stomped on, whether it's intentional or not, the ants are getting stomped on. And when we think about creating systems and creating these AI systems responsibly, it's more than just trying to do good. We actually really have to think about beyond the intentions that we have, or even being completely oblivious to intentions, the actual outcomes of the choices that we're making. And with that, I will pass it to John.
Cool. Yep. Let's move back. All right. Yeah. So I wanted to basically give a small recount of my experience, like how I got to where I am now. Just to kind of say right up front, when I was a high school student like you all are right now, in upstate New York, where I grew up and kind of had grade school, went through everything. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I had kind of I was reasonably good at math, enjoyed science. I also really enjoyed creative arts, art, painting and music and so forth. And so I went, I did my eventually a degree in mechanical engineering to kind of pursue, because I also wanted to be an astronaut. So basically did some things to meander my way through school to kind of do something like that. But before that, I went to school for architecture and switched out of that because I had these bifurcating desires to do science or do creative this or that. So that's kind of how I ended up ultimately meandering to the science part, but sort of in the and I always had this creative bone inside me that I wanted to do something more. So I did do I went to the science route, and I did kind of science in NASA as well. So that kind of was my first job, as it were, after doing that degree. But I wanted, again, to do a little more creative, scratch that creative itch. So I went back to grad school, but I did that in sort of robotics, which is a lot different from the rigorous, scientific endeavors at NASA, which is trying to land people on, the space station, do experiments for, outer space, also do experiments for, aviation safety and things like that. So aircraft, making aircraft work and everything like that, which is very exciting, but also, very rigorous and very one track. So I did a PhD degree. After that, I decided to do that. Up there, you can see my advisor, who's in purple, and the lab mates as well. We're huddled around robots. A lot of times, it's not the case. You kind of work with robots some of the time, but algorithms a lot more of the time, and writing and just thinking and brainstorming and things like that. So that's kind of my kind of experiences as a grad student here. So and then did everything from box pushing to making robots walk around and avoid each other, mainly for the purposes of keeping people safe, like humans and so on and so forth, happy and safe, and be able to interact with robots in a way that you couldn't before. You don't have to be a programmer to kind of interact with the robots. That's the idea here. And so I think that you saw some of the. So after that, I kind of landed a job here in Boston at Toyota Research Institute, and I think you saw the demonstration downstairs, which covers some of this, but basically it's about driving, and we do a lot more than just driving. We do materials, we do AI for understanding how to interact with humans better in an effective way, for creating harmonious communities, carbon neutrality, so on and so forth, and also robotics, helping the elderly in the home. And these are all very kind of noble causes, and that's kind of what drove me to kind of this career path. And also is quite, if you notice, it's creative, because you basically have to think about how best to bring to bear all these computational tools, which Neman brought up, to certain problems that are very important, but not overstepping the bounds of what an AI should be doing. So in this case, we're not going full out autonomous driving. If you notice here, we're doing autonomous driving for the purposes of doing something cool, like drifting a car. And this is the Thunderhill racetrack out in California, and we were kind of looking at, basically how do you make people safer inside the car by doing this. So imagine, instead of drifting on a racetrack, which is very cool, by the way, you're skidding on ice, and you're just oh, what do I do? You don't want to run into the tree, right? So having AI help you kind of guard the vehicle into a safe place, safely maneuver the skill or teaching people how to do this on their own is a very important thing, and that's what we're striving to do. It's a very tall task as well. So that's what makes it really exciting. And so so I work in the top right. You can see kind of the analytics behind it. You're looking at cars emerging on the road and like how to maneuver them and so on and so forth. So I deal with like AI at that level though. That's just to say that AI to me means like we're doing a lot of simulations in the computer and basically understanding how things play out in the real world, like at the bottom there. Like in the lab, I spend only a small amount of the time like actually doing things in real world. A lot of the time is like, working on computers and so forth and making things work. So so I think I'll leave it at that. And any questions, feel free to ask during the panel session. So
Sounds good. Now we just have to do a quick, let's give John a nice round of applause. And we just have to do a quick computer swap, so thank you for your patience. All right, it looks like our slides are up, so we're going to pass it over now to Regina Barzilay.
Okay, so good morning. I should introduce myself as a mother. So my son is 10th grader, and when I was asked to give a talk, I was just thinking, he never came to my lectures, but I was imagining that he's here, correct? So, and I was thinking when I was putting this short talk together, what is the advice that I can give to somebody who is 10th grader or later in high school? How can you think about your career and how you're thinking about AI? So at MIT, besides doing research, I also teach one of the largest machine learning classes. If you enter MIT, you can take undergraduate machine learning during your second year, some take it during the first year. And what happened in the last few years, it's not only computer science major, which is my home department, but also people across the whole institute are taking this class. Even if you study chemical engineering, or you study business, you're taking today machine learning and AI classes. So it's kind of become part of the central of our education. Now, I want to tell you how did I get to PhD and how I gradually progressed to where I am now, and also to tell you how some classes that I found kind of useless in high school are really helping me today in my research. So when I started doing my research, it was in 1996, 1997. I wasn't planning to do a PhD. I was a student in Israel in a small university. Here you can see me in my first conference. So I was very lucky. My advisor sent me to the first conference, and at the time I was doing research in natural language processing. And just to give you an idea where the field was at the time, like today, I'm sure everyone in this audience used Google Translate or speech recognition and all this stuff. In 97, this field was almost non-existent. So what I'm showing you here is something that really enchanted me in 97. I saw the first time that machine can take two documents which are translations of each other, which is like thousands of them, and then learn something like dictionary. So what you see here, for those of you who read French, I don't, you can really see these phrases that machine learned. And you can say, what's the big deal? I can take the dictionary and do it. But to me, it was like really, really interesting how machines that doesn't understand anything can do this translation. And that started my journey. Like after attending one conference in Madrid, I decided I'm going to do research in natural language processing. I did a lot of it. That's how I got to MIT. Particular topics that I found very fascinating is decipherment of dead languages, and we were the first time to demonstrate that machine can take a dead language for which you don't have parallel data and can actually bring it to life and translate it to languages that we do understand. So I was kind of doing this fascinating things, but frankly speaking, not very useful. And maybe 7 years ago, very randomly, I got interested in something which is related to drug design. So what I found out, and AI was not used at all in chemistry, what I found out is that you can actually today, if you want to design a drug, what you study in chemistry, you need to do a lot of experimentation. There are billions of molecules out there, and if you are today in pharma industry or in chemical industry, you can scan maybe 10 million molecules. And this is like one of the biggest scans, because each molecule needs to be manufactured. So the question is, can you take a machine and let machine just see the chemical formulas that you see at school and say whether they have desired property or not, whether they are toxic, whether they have the right activity. And in particularly, the first real entry into this field came from antibiotics. And what you see here is actually my father. Months ago, I had to go to Israel because he was super sick. And he got one of these bacterial infection. And when I arrived, we kind of were almost ready to say goodbye. But what happened is bacteria that he had was sensitive to penicillin. And penicillin, this very basic drug that was invented over 100 years ago, was the one that actually saved his life. But there are many other bacterial infections for which you don't have a cure. So if you get this bacterial infection, there is very little you can do, because bacteria actually grew resistance to many antibiotics that we put out there. And just before the pandemic started, we were the first one to demonstrate that you can use machine learning methods to identify molecule which happen to be non-toxic to human, which is a very strong antibiotic against these 3 different types of species, like C. difficile and E. coli, for which you don't really have a good drugs when it becomes drug resistant. And the interesting way how easily you can do it. This is the most exciting part, how AI can make it so easy. So what you can see here is Jonathan Stokes, who was a postdoc at MIT. He took these molecules, he took like around 2,500 molecules, and checked in the lab which of them kill bacteria and which don't. It's something very easy to do, and if any of you do internship in biolabs, you can even do it yourself. And then he kind of recorded which of these molecules kill and which don't. And then you can actually say, how do I train my machine? You give to the machine, like what we did with language. You give to the machine a molecule and you give a number. A machine can actually learn to translate the properties of the chemical to a particular activity. And now, I want to get to you in the last 2 slides about something very interesting that happened. So I'm sure that many of you know about like one of the biggest fundamental kind of advancements that happen in the field is AlphaFold, which enable to tell you the structure of the protein. Because in order for us to design a cure, we need to understand how protein lives in 3D. And until now, it was extremely hard. The deep learning, like 2 years ago, enabled us to get there with the DeepMind's work. Now, but the big question is, it's not enough just to know the structure of the protein. You actually need to know how drug interacts with the protein. This is a big question. So just a month ago, in my lab, we were able to build the programs that actually can take a protein and can take a small molecule and learn how they come together. And the methods that is used to do it actually relates to something some of you have done. Oh, what's going on? Great. So it relates to something you've seen maybe in the newspaper. It's called fake images, correct? So these images, none of them actually show real animals or real fish. Those are things that were automatically generated by a particular type of models that come from thermodynamics. Those are models that create diffusion processes. And the idea here that you want to teach your machine to kind of identify distribution of your images, for instance. And the way you do it, you kind of infuse the noise into every step. So you start with a normal image, you infuse the noise until you kind of black out the whole image. But then you can train the machine to go from the noise to normal images. And that's how you can sample from this distribution and create the set of lots of images. So in our case, what we do, whatever, I can make it work. Embarrassing being an MIT computer science professor, but what I'm trying to say, in this case, we actually created a diffusion process for proteins and small molecules that utilize a lot of principles from physics to actually being able to very accurately predict the pose, how the small molecule interact with proteins. So I guess one point that I want you to take from my talk is that, you know, I took chemistry at school and I didn't really study it in the university. But I took just one class of chemistry in the university. But it really, really helped me now to do research in this area. And the physics teacher that I had was terrible. I didn't study physics. I really pay for it every day because I need to study it now. So my point is that even if you're looking at the subjects that maybe today they don't look to you the most exciting, there can be a day in your life when you will find them very useful. And even if you didn't have a chance to learn them well in high school, you can always relearn them after 50. That's what I'm doing now. So thank you very much.
Thank you to our panelists for doing such great introductions to some of their work and how they got into their career paths. I'm going to work on swapping the computers again, but before I do that, I was going to start with just a question to open up the panel. And again, if you all would like to submit a question, I'm going to put the Slido QR code back up so you can submit it through that, or you can always raise your hand and we'll have a runner get you a microphone as well. But to get us started, for our panelists, I'm thinking that we have a lot of high school students here who might be interested in pursuing something like AI as a career in the future. I was hoping you all could share from your perspective, if someone was interested in pursuing a career in AI, what courses of studies, skills, or experiences would be good to recommend that they pursue to help them get into the field?
As Regina just said, there's a lot of different, and actually, as we've all said, there's a lot of different ways to get into AI. I'm biased, so I would say I think studying philosophy, studying ethics is really useful if you're moving into sciences or technology studies that has big impacts and often disproportionate impacts on marginalized or vulnerable groups. But of course, math and science classes. So I would say, the hard sciences, but also social sciences and the humanities are really important. So I don't think there's one particular path. I feel like if you're interested in AI, you should also follow the other things you're interested in or the subjects you're interested in, and there's a lot of different ways to get into it.
Yeah, I'll follow up with, all of the above. I would say if you are interested in sort of the guts of like what's under AI, like algorithms, machine learning. I mean, take math. Any of the sciences. I think give you that insight of the scientific method and the types of things to, like Professor Barzilay said. You may not need it immediately, or might not find like these chemistry or physics interesting immediately, but the methods work. I mean, the methods are useful and definitely carry over to this sort of the science of at least of AI or machine learning. I would say basically programming, computer science, if you Python knowledge, robotics, anything like that, just to get you kind of your hands on like the keyboard to program something goes a long way. Like I build on that every day. Like basically all of the things I do right now are basically just similar to what I did like in college, like just doing little projects with hardware or just gathering data, anything like that, and just understanding how to manipulate that data, how to make a simple program work and everything like that. Just builds on each other. So I'll leave it at that.
So I'm teaching, I told you, this class. I can tell you what do you need at MIT to go and take the class. So you need to be able to program. Now, we have two versions of the class. The one for computer scientists, where we assume that they can really do Python properly. But there is now another version which kind of enables you to read the code, but you really don't need to build systems. And an important thing that happened in AI, which happened in the last decade, that previously, if you want to build a deep learning system, you kind of need to go from scratch and to do your own optimize and your own thing. Today, there was a big movement to create a blocks. So you can build a machine translation system in a day if you know how to put these blocks together. So there is also a place for people who are not really interested to do low-level coding to kind of understand how this block works to build their own buildings. But overall, what we assume, the student know, some calculus, some linear algebra, some matrix operations, and some probability. MIT has a class which is free and it's online. It's called Machine Learning with Python. So for those of you who are interested, you can take it. It's available online. And what I just want to say that what's surprising, and I've hosted a few high school students in my lab before pandemics, that you can actually solve a lot of problems very fast if you understand a bit of principle. So there are disciplines that you really need to study a lot before you can start producing. Today, machine learning is at the point that once you understand some basic principles, you can start doing your own thing, applying it to, to wide range of things that we described here.
Excellent. And we have a lot of questions coming in to the Slido right now. So thank you for everyone who's submitted one so far. One question we have here is there currently any applications for AI in BME? I'm assuming that's biomedical engineering. If so, could you give some examples?
So I guess this one would be the closest. So this is an area that kind of now totally is redone with AI. So I just started showing to you AI for predicting the structure of the protein. What now happens, there are the first generation of synthetically generated proteins which are predicted by AI, which totally changes the field of, design of vaccines and other things. If you think what happened to us during the pandemic, I think it was atrocious because it took so long until it came out. And even what we have now still doesn't work well with the variants. So this whole field is now getting totally redone with AI. Because instead of kind of relying on human intuition or experiments about how biological and chemical reactions are going, and you can actually use AI for that, I think all the areas of biology and bioengineering, like immunology, metabolomics, all of them are going to be redone with AI. And I just want to give you another piece that was very striking for me when I entered this field. And again, this field developed since 2016, where AI and molecular science came together. We have a program that does a task that maybe some of you in your chemistry classes are doing. At least I did it in chemistry classes. When you are given reactant A and reactant B, and you need to predict reactant C, do you do it in your classes when you need to guess what will be the outcome of the reaction? So we selected a set of reactions and gave them to postdocs at MIT in chemistry and chemical engineering, which is supposed to be quite good, and their professor. So machine outperformed all of the students and postdocs. And it did almost as well as a professor, but it was a few years back. I'm pretty sure that now machine can do better than this chemistry professor at MIT. So as you can see, a lot of capabilities are totally rewired. So now we are restructuring all these life sciences at MIT to make AI a central tool for design.
And we have a recurring theme running through some of the questions here, and it has to do with sort of what AI will or could take over in the future. One that I think is interesting is how likely is it for creative art to be taken over by AI generation? And what are your thoughts on using AI to produce art?
I'm happy to start with that one. I think it's extremely unlikely that that AI technologies will fully take over art. Creative expression has been part of being human since early cave paintings, and I think it's just part of how we're wired, whether it's literature or music or visual art. We want to express ourselves, and we use tools to do that, whether it be a paintbrush or a camera or Photoshop or Instagram filters or now, DALL-E. So I think on an individual level, I respect and appreciate people who were afraid that certain types of illustration work, for example, might be changed or even substituted with certain types of technologies, but this really isn't new. Despite what you see in the headlines, technologies have always been aids to creative work. So personally, I'm more optimistic that these tools can help make us more creative. We can use them collaboratively. We can kind of be pushed further. Just like, when photography was supposedly invented, although it was a very slow process because cameras were around much before images could be fixed, people said painting is dead, like as if there wouldn't be a use for painting anymore. But instead it just changed the way people painted. It actually changed, the desire for representation was just altered by the invention or, by photos being able to be fixed. The invention of photography, I guess you could say. And I think that's the time we're in now. So again, on an individual level, I respect and appreciate people's concerns about this, but I think at a broader level, it's really an exciting time. I will mention, because there are risks, and I think this question was getting to risks, that some of the risks have to do with individual copyright and ownership of images. So when artist images are used to train as the training data, and those artists aren't being paid for their images, and then their styles are being replicated by AI systems, I can see some concern around that. And also, of course, you can use these systems to generate misinformation or deepfakes, and there's concerns around that too. But in terms of actually supplanting creative work, I'm more optimistic than that. Anybody else have a thought on this topic?
Yeah, I'll second that. I mean, I think that there's kind of this guardrails that need to be placed around, AI just kind of running amok on kind of different problems. But I do see it as sort of a paradigm shift in how we kind of think about like what is an AI and how does that partner with maybe an artist to do some kind of creative output that's above and beyond what they could have done before. So for example, like if you have like a debilitated person that doesn't have use of some of their limbs or something, then perhaps AI could help them express what they have inside. Or you don't have the skills to just do that, and you don't build up your skills for like several years. You could build AI just to help with that part as well, building skills to get to that level of I can express myself in a way. So these are benevolent kind of causes. We have to like move towards them, and I think policy could be like one of the answers. Yeah, and so forth. But in general, yeah, I think the future is bright. But I think that we do have to place guardrails on what we're doing.
Excellent. And just looking at the time, I think we might have time for one more question. And there does seem to be an interest from the audience just thinking about the ethics of AI. So one question here is, when AI breaks a law, for example, maybe it's involved in a pedestrian that injures or kills someone in a driverless car, who should be responsible, the AI developer or the end user?
That's a great question. And not one that's easily answered. I mean, obviously when you're a designer, you're not thinking about like all of the use cases that are out there and, the kind of like feel the effects of your technology that you're making. So a lot of what I was doing before I'm, working on like drifting cars and everything like that, our technology is to bake in sort of these common sense ideals into the AI system. So you're not sort of just letting something train and just like letting it run amok in the world and hoping for the best, right? So, and that was kind of like a fallout from my PhD work as well. So that's like deeply interesting. There's no clear answer to, technologically, we have some clues as to what we want to do. Like we can, put in rules of the road of like traffic laws and what Neman brought up, like the trolley problem, which I hope no one ever has to face. But just baking in these rules of like what's ethical, what is sensible, and everything like that. But even that is hard because you can't just sort of like marry that with a system that works and hope that it kind of works in every case. And there's this kind of recurring problem of like of testing the system you put out there ad nauseum until it works. Like to your satisfied, it works, but it's infeasible to test all of the possible combinations of the world that you could be faced with. And that's the perennial problem right now. And who's responsible? We don't have an answer. I mean, it should be, it should be answered before we deploy these technologies. That's what I can say. But in a lot of cases, like, we're deploying the technology and hoping for the best. And that's the other.
I love this question. I'm also glad to hear that there were so many ethics questions, as you probably got from my talk. I think as we're building things that have more and more power, we really need to keep them in check. And so I do think, to John's point, regulation is extremely important. Like another theme is these aren't all as new as it feels and as new as the headlines that make this stuff sound. We do have precedents for other technologies and how those have been regulated. So like if I just like built an airplane in my backyard and then like wanted to take their money and take people up to fly my plane, I would not be allowed to do that. Flights are regulated. Building an airplane has a lot of checks and balances. There's a lot of systems in place even with autopilot, for example. So if you just build your own car and make your own seatbelt, that doesn't count. There's regulation in terms of what counts as a good seatbelt and how that's tested, and then who's held responsible if something goes wrong. So I guess a quick answer to the question is it's not answered yet, but it's not going to be the AI, because AI is not an agent that can have It's not an agent that can have liability. It needs to be either a company or an individual that's held responsible. One thing that's really tricky about this is that we have different jurisdictions. There's, what governs laws in the U.S. is different than in other places, but these technologies go across borders. So it's a really interesting time in policy and regulation to be thinking about some of these big questions. But ultimately, I personally believe that companies and corporations need to be held responsible when they build things that harm individual users. And I think we need to push for that, even though companies may prefer that their responsibility falls elsewhere.
Excellent. And yeah, I think with the time being that it is, we'll give our panelists a nice round of applause.